tweets here before we really get into this show. Good times. Let me get rid of that right there. I'm back from a vacation. We're going to talk about that a little bit on the show too. And we are live. All right, thanks for tuning in to another Monday morning tech chat show, this time on a Tuesday. The family and I spent a lovely weekend in San Diego, and now we're back, and it's time to get back to work. And I'm still doing a podcast, even though I'm a day late. So a lot of these stories that we're going to be talking about, we get a little bit more time to kind of pad into them. But the whole point of the Monday morning tech chat show is to spend a little bit more time digging into those headlines. We see news is coming at us fast, and we want to make sure that we're staying on top of some of these big stories. I see Alex Morgan on Periscope. TK, hey man, hello all the way from London. What's up, TK? And Q3 Becker, good morning, champ. Good morning to you too. Now TK out there in London, covering an honor event. He's been killing it lately with his cell phone coverage. So I would definitely recommend checking out TK's YouTube channel because he's got some killer stuff out there. And when he gets back, I'm hoping we can do a little work together on a project. I know I've been saying that for a while, but after that amazing debate video that we had with TK and Josh Vergara on my channel, I want to make sure that we keep that momentum up and running. And Brandon Miniman, sup fam? How you doing, sir? Welcome to the Monday Morning Tech Chat on a Tuesday. All right, I've got a couple quick little stories that I want to chew through here real quick. Just a couple little tidbits. We're not going to spend a lot of time on this because I want to make sure we're getting to the big story in that title. I'm going to wrap it up at the end of the show. Aditya, what's up? Yeah, this is kind of ridiculous for anyone who's listening to this podcast on the RSS feed. I apologize. It's just, I very much enjoyed chatting with my live streaming compatriots. But this is kind of a big deal story coming up today. At the time of this recording, we're hours away from an asteroid set to narrowly miss Earth. And here's how you can watch it. So this is, I mean, a lot of outlets are covering this. This is a pretty big science story, but this is globalnews.ca. An asteroid that's estimated to be the size of the Statue of Liberty will narrowly miss Earth as it passes by the planet on May 15th. That's today. Hey, James Vincent. How's it going, sir? The asteroid is called 2010 WC9 and was first detected 8 years ago by the Catalina Sky Survey in Arizona. Now, it's going to come within 203,000 kilometers of Earth. 200,000 kilometers. I think that's a little bit, what is that? That's closer than the orbit of the moon. It's, what, half the distance to the moon? Yeah, it's roughly half the distance from the Earth to the moon. That's how close this asteroid is going to come to us. Now, an asteroid the size of the Statue of Liberty would do serious damage if it hit a city, obviously, or if it hit an ocean by a city. But it wouldn't be an extinction level event. It wouldn't be a planet killer. Still, it's really freaky to think giant space rock is going to come closer to our planet than our planet is to the moon, and the moon can controls the tides. That gravitational impact is pretty huge. So around the world, if you're wanting to try and catch a glimpse of it, it's so close. If you have even just a consumer grade telescope, you'll probably be able to see it. There are plenty of resources, plenty of links where you can check it out. But it's going to come at its closest around 3:15 p.m. Pacific time, so 7:15 Atlantic time. That's crazy. Again, that we can be aware of these objects in space, that we can track their progress, and that when they get this close to us, you can buy like a camera lens that's able to see it up in the sky. So that's pretty nuts. Hello from Jakarta, from Arai. James Vincent is off sick from work, but I hope he's feeling better. Renato Laporte taking a break from painting my sister's home. Almost done. No effing asteroid will dare to destroy my work. That's the freaky thing, man. Life is precious, and giant space rock fall out of the sky. we don't really have much say in that. But it's also, again, why I think science research is so important, what we can do to maybe get some kind of early warning system. We've been working on that for every other kind of natural disaster, earthquakes, etc., volcanoes. It would be nice if we had some kind of way to maybe counteract giant space rock nuking our planet. Kyle Ruggles, hey Juan, what a pleasant surprise. Well, Kyle Ruggles, you joining my live stream is also a very pleasant surprise. And Chris Moran is watching me from work today. I wholeheartedly approve of not getting your work done. Next story, and I definitely want to hear you folks weigh in on this one. We've been covering a lot of news, things like cutting the cord. Last week on Newegg Now, we had a whole segment on cord cutting, getting rid of basically every cable that you can. And one of the biggest cables to get rid of is cable. This is news that is potentially exciting and also gives me a little anxiety. This comes from theplaylist.net. Netflix says they'll add 470 originals between now and the end of 2018. The end of this year, over the next 6 months, they're going to add almost 500 new properties. So we're talking TV shows, we're talking movies. The service is going to spend up to $8 billion on content for this year. We don't have any kind of breakdown on what exactly those numbers are going to look like. But that's a ton of stuff coming to Netflix soon. Now, what makes me anxious about this is I feel Netflix still has a discovery problem. I do not enjoy the most recent incarnations of Netflix's app, on the phone or on my smart TV. I have a Samsung smart TV, and I don't like trying to find content on Netflix. Alex Morgan, that's a crazy amount of original content. Crazy Netflix. It's like Crazy Eddie's, I'm sorry, I shouldn't do that. And from Kyle Ruggles, I was just thinking last night, it looks like Netflix is pushing out other content by pushing so much of theirs. And I don't know that it's necessarily a one-to-one, Kyle. My feeling on this is, with Netflix's popularity, they're probably having to deal... James Vincent live streaming SGG on the big TV. Yeah, buddy. One of the things... Sorry, I got off track there, Kyle, is I think it's one of those situations where as contracts come up to renew content, Netflix is going to be less and less interested in hosting and promoting other studios' content on their service, and then instead they're going to be looking to promote their own content. My big issue, my big fear is I'm worried about how to discover, organize, and track this content, because I already think it's a problem on Netflix's service, and they've been doing a bunch of really annoying things. Like in the Android app, you go to look for genres, well, you have to go to search. So you don't have the menu slider in the same way, where like you pull out the little hamburger menu and you can see all the different genres. No, you had to just know that it was buried under the search icon. So then you hit the search icon, and then you can go to your genres, which seems like an unnecessary step to hide it there. But then when you go to hit search, your keyboard doesn't pop up. And that's one of my biggest pet peeves with any Android app out there, is instead of taking me to search, search is now where they hide categories. That's not what search is. Search is search. If I push that magnifying glass icon, I want to start typing words so that I can get a meaningful result on what I'm hoping to find specifically. If I'm looking for categories to just generally look for things in a plodding, pedestrian kind of way, then I should have a separate resource for categories. That to me seems to be a much wiser utilization of app space. But I digress. Kyle Ruggles, LOL, search is search. You've summed it up wonderfully well. Alex Morgan, that's horrible. It's bad design, right? I'm not making this up. I love Netflix as a service, but every single time I hit a search icon, I expect to have a keyboard. But this is something that's becoming problematic across the entire app ecosystem, the entire app landscape. How many apps you go to where you go to hit search, and then you still have to tap into a text entry field before your keyboard pops up. F that. That's terrible. Renato Laporte. Hot word Google, find the search button on the Netflix app. See, that's why I want to get rid of apps. That's why I absolutely want to move to more of a digital assistant, IBM Watson, something, AI, machine learning kind of interfaces. I want to be able to just tap a button on my Bluetooth headphones and say, hey, I'm looking for a science fiction comedy. Find me something that you think I'll like based on my previous viewing habits, and just put it on the TV. And not have to just sit there and endlessly scroll. And that's another thing. I don't really like the layout for Netflix on the TV, where it's just these scrolling bars kind of loosely broken up by category. It just seems really inefficient, and it's not a good way to discover content that I haven't seen before. I don't know. So much of this algorithmic stuff doesn't seem to be getting any better. It seems to be getting worse. Sherrill, oops, almost missed it. Hi, Juan Bagnell. What's up, Sherrill? And from Q3 Becker, looking for the magnifying glass to find the magnifying glass icon. From Renato Laporte, I second that. I want to see the end of apps. It's taking too long. We can live from assistants and web apps. This is true. And Richard Ratner, hey, what's up, Richard? Thanks for joining. Richard Ratner, Netflix search is the worst. I don't know, guys. Discovery and conveyance. Conveyance is a big deal to me as we're going to more gestures. When I mentioned, I teased the debate that we had with TK and with Josh Vergara, and TK seems to be on the winning side of that debate as Android is looking to incorporate more gestures onto their phone. I don't believe anything is intuitive. I don't believe you can just make an intuitive interface, but what you can definitely do to help is draw upon familiar interface design and incorporate a high degree of conveyance. I think a perfect example of the lack of conveyance harming a new feature would be 3D Touch on the iPhone. There was nothing to tell the consumer, here is a part of the screen that you can force press, you can push into the screen to get a meaningful action or a meaningful result. And it seems that 3D Touch is going to be, or what is it, force press or 3D Touch, I forget what they call it now, is going to be devalued in the upcoming iPhones. Well, that's a bummer, because that feature could have delivered a significant benefit, an ergonomic benefit to the consumer by giving them something specific to push towards. Instead, it's going to languish and it's going to die. And that's also a real bummer, because that's something that if they had incorporated into the iPhone properly and properly shown users how to interact with it with some kind of visual identifier that you could do that, they probably wouldn't have had to get rid of the home button. I'm not a big fan of swipe up, from bottom edge of super slippery phone. It's just like another reason in terms of design and ergonomics that you have to buy and put a case on your phone if you don't want to fling it out of your hand someday because it's a slippery glass on glass device. But I digress. I didn't want to get too deep into that. Sherrill, convenience and conveyance should be in all design concepts from now on. And I feel like when we had more efficiency concerns, like lower power hardware from 10 years ago, you needed to have a distinct focus on a certain type of efficiency of coding. Now, I mean, these pocket supercomputers that we're walking around with are so insanely powerful that there doesn't seem to be the same need to minimize the interaction or minimize the system resources that app can suck up. From Jonky, if you don't like Netflix, never try HBO's app. It's so funny that I will put every other streaming service on a lower threshold. Like, I'm willing to forgive HBO, Hulu, I'm willing to forgive some of their transgressions because they're not at the tier of Netflix. I like Netflix as a service, and I hold them to a much higher bar than I do anyone else. It's so funny. From Yusuf, I love listening to this like a podcast on YouTube Red. Bless up. Good to hear from you again. Thanks for joining, buddy. All right, here's another quick little news story. Let me throw this back on. From CNET, NES Classic and SNES Classic back in stores on June 29th. Second half of 2018 is a new chance to grab a piece of Nintendo history. How you guys feeling about this nostalgic campaign to return hardware, NES hardware, back into back into the landscape. This is from the CNET article. The NES Classic and its 2017 sequel, the SNES Classic, are both expected to be available through the end of the year. The NES Classic was initially released in November 2016 and was a dramatic success. I don't know that I would categorize it as a dramatic success. This is funny. My wife is a hardcore OG Super Mario fan. She loved playing old school Nintendo games. Those were her jam. It's her, Superman's her favorite comic book character when she was growing up. NES games, her favorite era of gaming, and we fought so hard to try and pick up an NES Classic. And this is from Q3 Becker. I feel bad for people buying the NES or SNES Classic for $200 from scalpers. So we got so fed up. Again, it's like we've become that old cranky couple that just like whenever something doesn't go right or whenever we're upset by it, we just take our ball and go home. It's not like I'm going to sit here and try and play ball with Nintendo to give them money to buy old games and hardware in a way that is still locked to a platform. The flip side of this is like I can go back and play, decades old games on Steam anywhere I want. And in fact, I don't even have to load the game on an underpowered laptop if I'm on my home Wi-Fi. I want that. I want to be able to pick up some of my favorite zombie arcade shooters from my PS3 and not have to rebuy them for a PS4, even if they're even available, which one of my favorite games from the PS3 just hasn't been made available on the PS4. So what was the point of my PlayStation 4 investment if I couldn't go back and play some of these older games? So I did end up picking up an SNES Classic because, again, TK Bay took pity on me, and when he found one, he bought it and then told me that he had it for me. It was like he just took the initiative to fix that problem because he knew how upset we were about the NES Classic. And I paid him back for it. It wasn't like he just gave me an SNES Classic as a gift. But again, it was hilarious that he just did it. He was like, that's how mad we were about the NES. But I don't know that I want to go back and support this weird sort of locked down hardware-based business model. And other people have been putting things up too about like emulators and you could make a Raspberry Pi NES, or you could crack one of these open and flash new software and get it to run any game ROM. And again, I'm torn on that too because I want to support to an idea. I want to support financially the games that I love, and this is where we run into some of those issues. Like way back in the Napster days, how many times am I supposed to rebuy Master Blaster? Sorry. How many times am I supposed to rebuy Super Mario and Super Mario 2 and Super Mario 3? How many times do I have to move to a new hardware platform and throw money at stuff just to replay the games that I've classically always loved when technology is also cycling and moving things out? Like if I had an original NES, it wouldn't be difficult, but it would be kind of a pain to get it hooked up to a modern TV. So this is from Link057. Piracy is unethical, and that's absolutely where I'm torn. Is at what point can I just buy a license for a game that will follow me to future platforms and sort of future-proof that investment, or am I perpetually going to have to re-buy every game every single time we hit a platform shift? And what will that mean for sharing content with my daughter? There are going to be experiences that I'm going to want to show her, and let's say 20 years from now, do we really think we're still going to be using HDMI cables and TVs in the same way to recreate the experience of an NES? No, we'll probably be in some weird VR landscape where we can just plop, TVs up on the wall, but then because I'm tapped into that VR landscape, I'm going to have to rebuy the game for the VR landscape. And it just takes a lot of the fun out of that experience. When consoles, when the Nintendo was a new thing, you had this amazing fun experience of trading games and going over to a neighbor's house to play or coming over to your house to play and passing the controller around. And I kind of feel like there's no good method for the preservation of that experience. I wish Nintendo had sort of an ultimate licensing deal where we could sort of lock this down, because I think that would be the perfect solution. The emulator market has shown Nintendo how consumers want to do business. They want to be able to migrate this content to future platforms, and Nintendo doesn't seem interested in selling us a way to do that. So that's why there's an underground piracy benefit. Again, it's the same thing. Netflix's success was showing people a way to do movie streaming that was easier and more convenient than free, and also legal. You put all those things together and you have a winning business strategy. So, yeah, we've got a bunch of people here weighing in on this. From Q3 Becker, if you own the cartridge or bought the game on the eShop, I feel like it's acceptable to get the ROM for it. And that's tricky, right? Because, like, you're also supporting the proliferation of piracy, but you own it. Like, you can't transfer that experience. Again, like, you buy a CD, you can rip that CD and keep it as a part of your personal music collection, and technically that's still against the DMCA, technically, I think, or it might not be, because there might not be any copy protection on a CD. From Kyle Ruggles, I say from a certain time these old games should be public domain. I agree. I mean, we really need to re-examine the laws on public domain and when stuff transfers over into new licensing or new ownership. From Junkie, emulators and ROMs are a method of preserving art. Way too many old games are already lost in the sands of time. That's a great point. I forget what podcast it was on, but even like this whole notion of games for girls, how many classic, amazingly well-selling titles will probably never find any kind of preservation because, well, games are for boys, and they just sort of axed them and got rid of them. You're like, yeah, I might not be interested in playing, Barbie homeowner fashion parade 17, but maybe that game sold incredibly well, and that would be something nostalgic for a woman gamer to go back and revisit, and you just can't. From Sherrill, unfortunately, companies do not understand perpetual licensing, hence why we buy for every version of the game, period. From Link057, I still have my SNES from 1995, works like new. Kyle Ruggles, same for the 1993. And my brother just went back and started recollecting a bunch of old SNES games. Again, the hardware is great, but how much do we believe that we'll be able to keep pushing that to future generations of TV and future generations of connectors? And I don't know, like, if that's the only solution. That doesn't seem to me to be a very wise long-term business solution. Is, well, nope, you got to go buy a console from 1990. That's the only way you can play this game, because we also didn't make a digital version of it. But don't pay attention to any of the emulators or ROMs out there. No. The only way to play this is to go and buy an old console and find an old cartridge and hope that it all still works, and that's the way to back this up for the future. From Kyle Ruggles, say if you want Contra on your SNES but you can't buy it, so should we wait until we can actually purchase it in order to get the ROM? And then from Rari Ahreen, I butchered your name, I apologize. Modern companies don't help themselves when it comes to piracy. Look at the likes of EA. From David Baptista Silva, in Europe, copyright laws give you the right to rip CDs if you buy for your own use on other platforms. You can even make copies for yourself. And I don't remember what the United States rules are in terms of the DMCA. I believe that was sort of made tacitly legal. And by that I mean, because there wasn't any stringent copy protection on CDs outside of Sony's rootkits, that's taken it back. Because there isn't any stringent copy protection on CDs, that you can make copies for your own personal benefit so long as you don't distribute them. And I think that was the big problem. Oh, remember, Juan, it's brewery without the B. Ruari, not Ruari. Okay, so moving right along, I've got 2 more quick stories here. This one just made me happy. I don't have to spend a lot of time on this. robocalls have become a big pain in my butt. Most of the calls I get on my phone now are from scammers, and they caught one from Florida. Florida man hit with $120 million RoboCaller fine. That just makes me happy. So this is from CBS's Money Watch. The FCC Thursday finalized its largest robocalling fine in history against Adrian Abramovich, a Florida man who was charged with making nearly 100 million spoofed robocalls, in just 3 months. Hi, Linus. So, Abramovich, who asserted his Fifth Amendment rights against self-incrimination in his Senate testimony, could not be reached for comment. However, the FCC alluded to and soundly rejected his legal response to the FCC charges in which Abramovich claimed he did not mean to cause harm or wrongly obtain anything of value. NBD, guys, I totes didn't mean to try and scam anyone. I just blitzed 100 million phone calls in 3 months. Yeah, it's funny that, like, for all of our fears over, like hacking and data breaches and scandals, we're going to be talking about another Facebook scandal in just a little bit. For all of these big fears about, like, hackers and high-tech stuff, no. I like the bigger sources of problems are coming from old tech again. You can throw just a little bit of whiz-bangery at something like a phone bank that can then spoof phone numbers that make it look like those phone numbers are coming from people's areas. So, you don't get a weird phone call from, like, another country. It shows up with, the same area code that you've got. And this is the one that burns me is I don't always automatically recognize certain phone numbers. And I know that there are people who, like, might contact me from, like, a separate phone number that I don't have listed under their contact info. So I see my area code pop up, and it's really difficult just to not let it, like, pass or send it to voicemail. It could be something important. So like a dumbass, I answer the phone, I hear, like, robot voice start talking, and I just immediately hang up. But then it just sort of verifies my phone number is active and it's a real person that will answer the phone. So then I get hit with more robocalls. Anything we can do to kind of put a stamp on this. For once, in this administration, I'm actually kind of stoked by something the FCC actually did to try and protect consumers. So, well done there. That's pretty great. So, moving right along. Yeah, robocalls suck. So, the last quick little news story that I want to spend some time on. Fat Produce finally made it. He had a meeting. Now, guys, it's okay that Fat Produce couldn't join the show earlier. My buddy Andrew Wallace, co-host on the Geek Book Club. But he's finally here now. And so now we can finally get the real show started. So thank you for joining us, Andrew. This is from FE1538C. Not only app like YouTube sucks, phone stores, Steam too. Companies have left themselves in fill with garbage applications everywhere. 95% of the app are useless. No smart search. I mean, a number of different problems and issues with search in a variety of apps. An app design needs a lot of work, but this is something that is going to make all of us groan and probably deflate a little bit, and that we're still talking about this. What is this? Almost 7 years later, 6 years later. So Apple and Samsung's patent battle is revived in California court. Hey. Who couldn't get enough of Apple and Samsung suing each other over design elements like rectangles and curved edges and swipe gestures? Oh man, I'm so happy that lawyers are still making bank on what is it? The Galaxy S2? This was the phone that was sued over, like the Droid Charge. This is coming from BBC News. Apple was originally awarded $1 billion in 2012 after a jury found the South Korean firm had infringed on several of iPhone's innovations. And it's hilarious that legal terminology. Retrial judge Lucy Koh, who sat in on the first case, said she intends to apply a Groundhog Day rule. Again, it feels like Groundhog Day for all of us that we're still talking about this, but what this means is that it's restricting the two companies to rehashing the evidence they presented before rather than offering up new facts. So this is also one of the reasons why this keeps getting stuck in this sort of limbo, is if there was new information, let's say they found some damning memos, or they found, something that would point to a clear decider for this case, they can't introduce it now. So they're stuck to the facts that they had 6 years ago. But this one is just coming back. It's coming back to the courts again because of how to determine the value of what was infringed upon. And so Apple is trying to make the claim that because Samsung violated some of their design patents, that they should be compensated for the entire cost of a Galaxy phone, a Galaxy S2, Droid Charge, and some other handsets from that time. Samsung is still arguing that they should only have to pay, because you can calculate those individual pieces and parts and what Apple, claims they ripped off, that because you can divide up those costs, that they should only have to pay for the parts of the phones that infringed upon Apple's design. And that's why it's coming back to California, because the federal judge, the federal courts couldn't agree on what that sum was. And then through some sort of legal issue or legal loophole, it's going to come back to a California jury. So as a result, the California jury will still need to determine what was the relevant article of manufacture in this case, the complete infringing smartphone or just some of its parts. Apple will say it's the former in this dispute, arguing that the phones would have no value without the designs of their bodies and user interfaces. So we haven't even finished, just arguing as to how much Samsung should have to pay. And then whatever the verdict is, that's going to set a whole bunch of patent law moving forward. It's going to take us 10 years to get to the end of that discussion. It's ridiculous. From Kyle Ruggles, history repeats itself. From Sherrill, let's say it all together, groan. From Kyle Ruggles, making patent battles great again. From David Baptista da Silva, and Samsung just patented a notch. More money in lawsuits coming. From Kyle Ruggles, the notch was just so obvious. Apple just beat everyone to the punch, and then sticking out tongue emoticon. From Renato Laporte, OMG, let it go. Let it go. And from Renato Laporte, how much does swipe to unlock cost? Let's put a dollar amount on swipe to unlock, because Apple didn't even really invent it. They just were first to put it on a consumer-facing product. Woo! And from Fat Produce, I think hell will freeze over before Apple and Samsung stop suing one another. Ongoing developments, ongoing cases. This is a technology law at its most exciting, is hashing out the details of rounded corner rectangles and glass front faces and icon similarity, because that's what we care about. Whether or not something's pretty and shiny enough. Stay tuned for my future coverage of the LG G7. All right. Getting into some new tech news. Huge new Facebook data leak exposed intimate details of 3 million users. So this is something that I really need your help on as savvy technologists. It's a conversation we need to be having with our family and friends. This is from newscientist.com. Data from millions of Facebook users who used a popular personality app, including their answers to intimate questionnaires, was left exposed online for anyone to access. Academics at the University of Cambridge distributed the data from the personality quiz app My Personality to hundreds of researchers via a website with insufficient security provisions, which led to it being left vulnerable to access for 4 years. And gaining access illicitly was relatively easy. So, you know how your parents, raised you. If you're around my age, maybe a little bit younger, you had all that stranger danger kind of conversations. People would talk to you about, like how to protect yourself or when to yell fire, stuff like that. We need to start having conversations with our parents and grandparents about not doing dumb things on Facebook. Basically, everything that they warned us about for real life protections, they seem to be falling prey to online. I even had a run-in with my grandfather a couple years back where he was having a ton of problems with his computer because he would click on every single link, every single forward, open up every single executable file that his friends would send him through the emails, and he would just trust it. Well, I mean, Joe's sending me this hilarious Obama video that ends in .exe. Well, I should totally open it because Joe's a good guy. And so we actually got into a pretty good fight when, because he lives far enough away from me that just driving over to his place every single time he installed a virus on his computer wasn't really feasible. So I installed just one of those little monitoring, I could log into his computer and control the mouse and keyboard and check things out, run basic, adware, spyware, malware scans to try and keep his PC clean. And I was doing everything I could to lock stuff down, install ad blockers, but he would just literally open up files attached in emails, and it was getting kind of ridiculous. So my grandmother, after I had gone through all this work, cleaned out their PC. It was running great. Again, within a day or two, I think they had 7 toolbars reinstalled on their browser. But she called me in a panic that the software I had installed was also a security threat. When it wasn't, because she went to one of her favorite websites and a huge banner popped up that said, people were spying on my computer. You need to uninstall this tracker. And so I went back and forth with them, explaining the differences. What they were looking at was an advertisement and probably a malicious attack if they clicked on it. And then I ended up just uninstalling it, and I'm pretty sure their computer doesn't work at all anymore. And it's sad because they didn't want to listen to me. And every metaphor, like this is the grandfather that I used to, rebuild car engines with. So you would think that just some basic explanation of how these processes worked, he would grasp or he would understand. But nope, they weren't having it. Pop up on their browser was more important than their sort of tech, their tech specialist grandson telling him what was going on. So this is where I think I need your help in moving the ball forward. Everything you can do to limit your elder family members from participating with this kind of stuff, better education, more conversations, because we know it's not going to come from Facebook. And unfortunately for me, I did my throw my hands up in the air. I said fine. I took my ball and went home. And I still kind of feel bad about that to this day, that maybe I should have fought a little harder to try and protect my grandparents from scams, but they weren't very open or amenable to re-educating themselves on what they needed to do to be good tech citizens and not fall for scams or traps or anything like that. I don't know that I would have been able to move the needle on what they considered important or not, but I always kind of felt like I maybe should have tried a little bit harder. Well, now we're seeing more and more evidence. It's not some hacker breaking into Facebook and sucking out all of our personal details. It's people willingly throwing all of their information out into the ether, and then that information not being properly protected outside the purview of Facebook. To a degree, I think Facebook needs to be held responsible for the services that they allow to utilize consumer data because they're making money off of that. But ultimately, we're not going to get a ton of protection from Facebook. It's going to be, we need to do this ourselves. And we need to break through to the members of our families who think these fun quizzes are super nifty. And, oh, yeah, let me give you all of my access to all of my information. And you can track all of the behavior of the people I'm friends with. If they have public information available too, I'll just click OK because I want to find out which Ewok I'm most like. And you're like, that's not okay anymore. We need to be doing a better job of locking that stuff down because, again, more of our information, the digital economy is really heavily weighted right now towards tracking our behavior, tracking our information, and selling it, again, it's just this insidious idea of this is how we're building services that you can use for free, then you become the product. We can break through to some of these family members. Like, if you got a letter in the mail that said, hey, give me all of your personal information and I'll tell you what your favorite flavor of cheesecake is, that you wouldn't do that. But for some reason, it pops up on Facebook that, an elderly friend of yours did this quiz and she's a Samantha. And now you want to do it too. And we've got to start blocking that stuff. And because it all gets tied up in this like fake news economy too. I have a family member I've mentioned before. I'm not going to out directly because she's still alive and I don't want to embarrass her and she might actually see this. But every single time a Facebook post pops up with something sort of vaguely patriotic or vaguely religious, if the phrase, I bet this won't get one share, is in the context, in the body of this dopey meme that's being shared, she can't share it fast enough. You're like, I don't think you understand how much of that has been propaganda, how much of it has been untrue, how much of it's sort of vaguely race baiting, or dog whistling. Again, like, it wasn't outright racist or outright prejudicial or outright bigoted, but it was pretty close. And I don't think that's what you meant to do. But because it had the phrase, I bet it won't get one share, you pushed it as hard as you could to get it out there. And that's not a good look. It's a bad look. So let's calm that down. You're up here. I need you, like, not all the way down, but maybe like right there, from there to there. That's it. That's all we need to do. Calm it down. Some scary stuff, man. We've got a bunch of these. Hold on. Let me scroll back up. Oh, man, there's a ton of stuff here. Get him set up on a virtual machine from Kyle Ruggles. I think now any computing he might be doing is from an iPad, so it's about as well protected as I think he would allow anyone into. A virtual machine would wig him out even more. From Alex Morgan, that's a lot of information that people just didn't think about exposing because it's on Facebook. Alex Morgan on the Periscope watching this stream. That's what's so frustrating, is for some reason people seem to be giving Facebook a pass on rationally considering their behavior. Well, it's on Facebook. It must be okay. And how did that come to be? Facebook is not some institution that's been around for generations. It's a relatively short window of time that it's been leeching off of your behavior. Social media in general is a very brief flash in the overall computing landscape. From Q3 Becker, Malwarebytes is heck of an important software for the elderly. That's what I was running. So I would log into their PC. I forget what program I was using to make the login a little bit easier, but it would screen share. I would go in, run malware, pop back out, and like I would make sure that I was doing it at times that they weren't there, because it really freaked them out when I showed them that I could take control of their mouse. I probably shouldn't have done that, because I thought I was doing my good grandson duties in educating them, but that instantly made that like, oh, well, this is, hackers could get this. And then they got banner ads that basically pointed to that exact eventuality. From Renato Laporte, fake Android apps are the new Internet Explorer toolbars. My grandmother's Galaxy had 5 apps called Messenger pushing ads. Ugh. That's one thing for my parents. I'm really glad that I have a PhD scientist for a dad and a mom who studied computer science and was a programmer and used to work for Ma Bell back in the day. That they might not always be super on the pulse with new services, but I don't have to slam my face against a brick wall getting them into new devices, new gadgets, and getting them to understand like the security implications of what they're doing. Like, my dad's rocking a Pixel 2. Like, he's doing fine. My mom's still on a Galaxy S5. I'm trying to push her towards something a little newer. And I think, again, if we can get a Galaxy Active this year, I think from Galaxy S5 to Galaxy S9 Active would be a killer upgrade. That I would be very excited for her to move to, because she doesn't like glass-backed devices. She might go with a metal-backed phone, because she did use, while she was traveling, she used an Honor 6X, when she was in the UK. And she didn't hate it, but she wasn't familiar with it. And she's been using Samsung, and Samsung would be totally different from the S5 to the S9, but at least there would be some kind of continuity with some of the ideas and some of the branding on apps, and she won't have to relearn a ton of that kind of stuff. But yeah, she doesn't want glass. She still wants, a big battery, more rugged build, better water resistance. And the S5 was it was an ugly phone, but it was pretty good for its time. So that's what I think I'm going to move her over to. But again, it makes me so happy. If she gets an S9, I don't know. I might get a couple phone calls just about where a couple different things are, or why does the home button feel kind of different, or what should I do about this in the camera? And she's intellectually curious enough on her own that she'll at least do some tracking on her own problems before she feels like she has to complain to me about something. And then we'll both get to complain about stuff, because we like to complain about why things change when they don't need to change, because she's a computer programmer. So she's going to pull up open that camera app from the S5 to the S9, and I guarantee you that she's going to be super bugged by how cluttered that interface is. But I digress. Q3 Becker, my friend wanted a flashlight app on his new Samsung smartphone and installed something with lock screen ads until I showed him the notification shortcut. Again, people just get so stuck in their ways. Oh, I have to install an app to control the flash on my camera to use it as a flashlight. Oh, man. Oh, this is a good one from Moomin74. I put Linux Mint on my mom's PC. I could probably get away with something like that today. Again, if my grandparents were still rocking any kind of PC, really using it, really utilizing it, I could maybe get away with that, because I don't think they'd be running any software that would have a hard time finding a corollary with Linux, and then I could just change the icons on their shortcuts. And Kyle Ruggles talking to Moomin. Good man. That's genius from Richard Ratner. From I can't pronounce your name. I'm sorry. From Zahui. Thankfully, my grandparents aren't interested in technology. They just have a landline. And from Sean Vega Velez, my mother will not use a computer. Therefore, I'm her search engine. She will never have a Facebook breach. And you know what? Sometimes doesn't that just feel better? Like, again, security through obscurity, it works. It totally works. Let me scroll down. I've got a bunch of stuff here, and thank you all for jumping in on this, because it's a topic that has been really frustrating. But again, I think it highlights when geek became chic. When all of this techie, nerdy stuff pushed into the mainstream, we geeks lost our foothold on being the advocates or the naysayers. People used to come to us 10, 15 years ago and really valued the opinions of enthusiasts and journalists that focused on the tech space, and that helped the conversation, that helped public discourse, and that helped the protection on this. We started talking about virus scanning and defragging PCs and giving our computers a tune-up, and people would really seek out that information and would really sort of abide by some of our recommendations. Now that tech is just pervasive. Everyone sort of thinks that they're kind of techie because they bought a really expensive phone. Or everyone thinks that they're kind of techie because their convertible tablet hybrid laptop has a touchscreen. And we still have some major conversations to happen in terms of how our private information is utilized, in how we can better protect our information. And I've got a couple stories coming up on that in just a bit too. Encryption and law enforcement, some of those issues as well. And so we need to find a new way as geeks, as tech enthusiasts, to rejoin that conversation for our family and friends so that they will come to utilize us as a resource again. That's what's really going to help move the needle from a community standpoint out, grassroots up. Not trying to lobby lawmakers, not trying to, because they're not going to do anything. Our current elected officials are woefully incapable of dealing with Facebook. They don't know what to do with it. And their current solutions are dog and pony shows. They're going to act like they're doing something. They're going to try and make it look like they're doing something. But there won't be, I don't believe there's going to be any substantive, that's that's close to the word that I want to use there. Any substantial change in Facebook operating behavior, operating policy, we're going to get a bunch of pop-ups like, oh yeah, we're revising our security features and you need to abide by our new licensing agreement or terms of service. And like, fine, because you guys are trying to do security theater here, so that's great. It's terrible. So we need to be the tip of the spear. We need to be leading those discussions. And as frustrating as it can be, again, why I shared that anecdote about my grandfather and why I share that as a regret is being able to sort of swallow our own pride and swallow our own elitism in a way that can make us more accessible for people coming to us from the outside. Not shutting down those conversations, really trying to embrace them, even when we might have told this person for the millionth time, like, don't install those trackers, don't install those toolbars, don't go clicking on random things, let me help you find programs that do the job better. Those types of things are going to be a big benefit for us moving forward to make sure that we can protect those people that we care about. We don't want to leave those people out in the cold. I see Luis Escobar joined on Periscope. Thank you for watching. All right, so a happier story, maybe. Again, how concerned are you about the upcoming robot apocalypse? Because I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. Boston Dynamics Spot Mini Robot Dog goes on sale in 2019. The star of numerous YouTube videos. This is by way of CNET, by the way. This is the robot we recently saw help another robot dog open a door. It's got this cute little claw hand thing that kind of looks like a little terrier face. It's extremely mobile, and it's got this amazing... Actually, I'm gonna just open a part of this video here, and I'll probably get a copyright strike for this. This is the Spot Mini navigating terrain. So it's walking through a warehouse and going down a hallway, and it can go up and down steps. And it's just an incredible... What Boston Dynamics has been doing in the field of robotics has been incredible. On my YouTube channel, I have the video from the most recent DARPA robotics competition. And the work that was being done there was absolutely incredible, because this wasn't just like, can we build a robot? This was, can we build a robot that can interact with human tools, tools designed for humans, vehicles designed for humans, navigate spaces, and do it with a bare minimum of communication, because it might be going into a disaster zone where you can't get good communication from a remote team. And so, yeah, it might take the robot an hour to navigate, all of this terrain, get in a vehicle, drive down, open a door, use power tools, navigate over rocky terrain or, crumbling infrastructure, and then make it up and down some stairs. You can check it out on my channel. I'll leave a link to this in the show notes when the show is finished processing. But Boston Dynamics got pulled out of that general competition because they went private. And the work that they've been doing has been another order of magnitude, just incredible. Watching biped robots jump up and down off of levels, so like they can do a vertical standing jump or do a backflip or, really navigate through spaces. And then their quadrupeds have just been mind-blowingly effective in doing work like this. So... Again, there isn't a lot of information in this story about what the exact the exact idea is here for selling the robot, the Spot Mini. This isn't going to be just some sort of consumer toy. It's definitely looking more at industrial infrastructure, some type of business or corporate solution, or maybe also something in the field of general healthcare, like for someone who needs some sort of an assistant of some kind for some kind of physical disability, that it could then be a solution for that too. What I'll be curious to see is, because this isn't going to be a cheap piece of equipment, and they're talking about making a very limited number of these. Something like Boston Dynamics has 10 Spot Mini prototypes. They're going to work with manufacturing partners to build 100 over the remainder of 2018. So we might only be looking at 100 of these out in the wild to start, but it's an incredible leap forward in terms of robot assistance and dynamic. I don't know what the word is that I want to use there, but the research that goes into making robots utilize human ergonomic situations. Watching this robot dog interact with people stuff has been absolutely amazing. Well, a bunch of the here. I got another from Kyle Ruggles. This robotic AI that's that's happening. It's happening so quickly. Come on, Terminator much? It's happening. Imagine in 5 years. From Tony S. AI and robotics, marketing versus reality. Discuss. So this is actually one of the things where I think companies are exceeding our expectations on what AI and robots should be able to do. Again, from the time that I did that DARPA video, that DARPA Robotics Challenge video, to today is only a couple of years, and we've seen incredible improvements to this. What we're running into is putting all of these pieces together and doing it in a meaningful way. Self-driving automobiles are averaging some pretty good driving distances per accident, and most of the accidents are coming from humans interacting with the robots, not from the robots misreading the situation. We saw Google in their Waymo presentation for Google I/O. We need to take this stuff seriously, because when something goes wrong, we need to figure out why it went wrong. But, you know, again, we're going to skew those stories for a little while. The same thing, you know, like a Tesla recently got into an accident and the driver broke his ankle. And all of these headlines of, oh, human injured in a Tesla accident. But let's ignore the tens of thousands of fatalities on our roads every year from people operating their own motor vehicles, and that Teslas drive safer over longer distances than the average for human, you know, or completely human-driven cars. You know, like when we start really comparing all of that information, the next time that there's a fatality in a self-driving vehicle, it's going to explode all over the news. Oh, look, self-driving cars. And we're like, yeah, but proportion, you know, let's relate this to something. But from Renato Laporte, that dog looks like the one from Metalhead episode of Black Mirror. Okay, so the most recent season of Black Mirror had so many of these like little heart-wrenching twist kind of moments. So Metalhead, spoilers coming up for Metalhead. If you haven't watched Metalhead, pause this video now. If you're watching it live, if you're not, skip ahead, 5 minutes. We're in a dystopian future. This robot is hunting a woman, and there's no explanation as to how we got to this point or AI run amok. I mean, they don't give us any exposition. It's just woman on the run, robot trying to kill her. We don't know why. And then the whole ending is supposed to oh, but she just wanted something. Oh, this is something for her child, and it was heartwarming. This is the human experience. But for this thriller, this survival story on the run, without those trappings or without those explanations, it's just technology is bad. And that, I think, misses the point of earlier episodes of Black Mirror, where there was some notion of tying that to modern society with a little more finesse or a little more nuance. Here it's just technology is bad. Technology will kill you and hunt you for sport. And without any kind of motivating or rising action or explanation of how we got to that point, it's just silly. It's kind of like Predator, but no explanation as to what the predator is or where it comes from or why it's doing things, and it's just going to kill you. And I just thought that was kind of silly. But yeah, so lots of people talking about dog drone strikes. Battery life is too short for proper service dog replacement, so it probably wouldn't go there. I agree with that. Let's see. The DARPA Spot Mini will be the courier in Dota 2. I would love to see Boston Dynamics make a licensing deal for Spot Mini and Atlas to start showing up in video games. I think that would be hilarious. From Link057, too bad Tesla is dead. Yeah, I don't think Tesla is going anywhere. Anyone who's trying to call off Tesla is dead doesn't understand how markets work. So we'll just move right along there. So I do have a couple Google stories that I want to get into here. Some very good news from the world of Android and Android P. Two quick stories. This is sort of wrapping up Google I/O stuff. Last week, we spent a ton of time on a number of podcasts digging into all the individual little elements of what was coming down the pipe for Google's developer conference. But this first one is something that I've been super cranky about for a long time. And this comes by way of XDA developers. Google is starting to require that OEMs roll out regular security patches. You spend $1,000 on a phone, you should expect that phone to be well maintained over its expected life. And I feel 2 years is probably insufficient for such an expensive investment that what lives in your pocket. At the annual Google I/O Developer Conference, company holds several sessions about updates to the Android platform. During the What's New in Android Security talk, Google's head of Android security, David Kleitermacher, talked about the upcoming security changes in the Android P release. I'm just going to skip ahead here. One thing he mentioned, though, was, quote, we've also worked on... Let's say that again. Quote, we've also worked on building security patching into our OEM agreements. Now, this will really lead to a massive increase in the number of devices and users receiving regular security patches. That is a big deal. So this is everything I've been talking about leading up to Nougat, and then crossing over from Nougat to Oreo. We saw Google putting more pressure on manufacturers to adhere to certain agreements for newer builds of the software. Project Treble became a big sticking point because some manufacturers didn't want to abide by those new restrictions that you would have to update, you would have to play ball with background services, you would have to minimize your overall footprint on skins and intrusive software. And they were even getting into some things like I forget what the name of that automation software is now. There was an app that helped you automate things on your phone, but it required a certain utilization of accessibility features that fell outside what Google felt accessibility features should be used for. So they locked that down too. Google is getting more restrictive. Now, for a lot of sort of home and hobbyist developers, that might be a red flag. It might mean some issues coming forward with custom ROMs, custom software, how you might decide you want to use your phone. But for the vast... Tasker, thank you, from Renata Laporte. Tasker got hurt by some of those changes to accessibility features. So that was that was a big shift. And I don't know that that's been fully sorted out or if they've found a solution for it because I don't really use Tasker, so I haven't kept up with it. But for the vast majority of people out there, you buy a phone, and then there's really no expectation in Android land that you're going to be receiving regular updates and regular bug fixes and patches and security updates. And this is a big problem with the platform. It takes a long time to make it through this chain. And we're also going to have to see whether or not Google can exert some of this leverage over carriers. So maybe Samsung starts doing a really great job of updating their phones, and you're on track to get the real operating system update, like going from Oreo to Google P, or Google Pi. I've been calling it Pi in my brain. So Samsung has a reputation for not putting out the update for their old phones until like their new phones running that software are out. So if you had a Galaxy S7 and you wanted the update, well, the Galaxy S8 launched with the update, and then the S7 got the actual OTA. That, I think, is really janky and should definitely be examined from some sort of regulatory perspective. But if we can even just move the needle on how quickly phones are getting security patches, security updates, Treble's supposed to help with that. That's awesome. And the fact that Google is putting pressure on how you can get certification for the, the Android Partner Program is exactly the move that I want to see them make. I think we're quickly getting to a point where Google is going to shift over their mobile operating system, or their operating system in general, to be a bit more like iOS, where a lot more stuff is constrained, is kept from the user, is locked down. But that brings better security, better compatibility, and faster updates. And at some point, it's got to be a little bit more like Microsoft, where it doesn't matter what carrier you're on. Like Apple, it doesn't matter what carrier you're on. New software comes out, you push update, and everything seamlessly gets down to the end user with as little interruption or as little interference from the manufacturer and the ISP or carrier you use. That's got to be the way moving forward when we're talking about all of these other security issues and problems and updates and fixes. From Tony S. This is going to be a big problem. So from Tony S. on YouTube, let's hope manufacturers don't fake security patches. Apparently some have been up to that in the past. A number of manufacturers have pushed out updates that say, oh, well, now you're running the current security software, but maybe we didn't patch everything. And that seems to hit people who own mid-range and entry-level phones a bit more than flagship phones. And again, that's insidious. That's a terrible state for our industry, because the people who are buying less expensive phones are probably a bit more vulnerable in other aspects of their digital life. They should expect the exact same security protection and care and maintenance as someone buying a more expensive phone. I know that makes me sound like a communist, but if you're going to charge $1,000 for one phone, you should be using the costs of that to subsidize support for less expensive devices. I don't expect, a $200 phone to get every new build of Android, but I do expect that when they put out a security patch, that phone is in line to get the patch, and that the full contents of that security patch are installed on that update. Yeah, terrible stuff. A couple people asking Tony S. in the comments if that was real. We covered it on the Pocket Now podcast a while back too. It's another one of those situations that probably should be garnering more outrage, but I think we're all in outrage fatigue in talking about these problems. And at some point, if manufacturers aren't going to be upfront about this stuff, then that's going to be another reason why different governments get involved in doing a more regulatory action against these manufacturers. But a happier update for Android P, one that kind of got passed by in a number of different stories about the Google I/O 2018. This is from Android Authority. Android P will ship with an all-new sound amplifier feature. And this one I'm very excited about because I'm a big old audio nerd. I'm going to take a quick drink of water. Excuse me. So, Google I/O keynote may already seem like a distant memory, but that doesn't mean there aren't little jewels to be dug up. Quite literally, the last session of the day, Google unveiled details about Sound Amplifier and its new dynamic processing effect that are heading our way with Android P. From Kyle Ruggles, overclocking the amp. So this isn't exciting from a consumer-facing standpoint. There are going to be a ton of new processing effects, filters, 5.1 surround sound support, EQ manipulation, and compression with a multiband compressor and expander. You aren't really going to be playing with a lot of that stuff on your phone. So this isn't like Google is ripping off Viper. If you're into some of those audio posts, and sometimes you have to flash a new ROM to get this crazy great granular control over the audio software on your phone. So it's not going to be that, but it's going to be an entirely new package of tools for developers to get in there and utilize audio hardware to a finer degree. And a lot of this is going to be coming down to sound modeling and compression. So compression is what, when we talk about it from an audio standpoint, it's not about making a file size smaller. It's about minimizing the peaks and valleys between loud sounds and quiet sounds. So you kind of mash that all together, and quieter sounds will sound louder and louder sounds will sound quieter, and everything kind of arrives at the same level. But Google also does a whole bunch of work in different types of modeling effects. So within certain areas of the EQ, we have a pretty good idea of where the human voice lives, for example. So one of the major benefits for this could be doing, say, a speech-focused mode for a video app. So let's say you've got some hearing issues. I definitely have some filtering problems just from the hearing damage that I've done in bad behavior. Check out episode 32 of the SGGQA podcast to have my sit-down interview with one of the leading audiologists in the country talking about hearing damage and smartphone use. Shameless plug for myself. But in some of this damage, I have a hard time filtering out conflicting noises. So I'm watching a movie and there's a dialogue sequence that's happening with action nearby or gunfire or something like that. This is a toolkit that could potentially give developers the ability to scalpel out frequencies of sound that resemble human speech and pull that to the forefront of the audio mix and minimize some of the surrounding audio.
that might be gunfire, action, music, something like that, to give you a better platform for hearing. What I would also love to see is a modeler, compression model for something like YouTube TV, where if you're on a channel that still shows commercials, where YouTube TV can intelligently sculpt audio from the end. This is the thing that bugs me about broadcast TV. You get to this moment where you're about to go to commercial, and it's usually held on some kind of dramatic, like, I'm looking at the camera, I don't know what's coming next. And everything sort of fades to its quietest point. But then the commercial kicks in, and it kicks in at the legal limit, the loudest it can possibly be. And it's a jarring, it shakes you out of having been a part of that media. It's a tactic to try and get you to pay attention to the commercial, but it's really, really annoying. So what if in YouTube TV we had a compression modeler for sculpting highs and lows so that when differences in audio happen, it pulls that stuff in? I used to run an actual recording studio hardware compressor on my TV speakers so that I could minimize the changes from TV show to commercial. And it was a pain. It was a lot of extra cabling under there. It would run kind of warm. It got really kind of gross and dusty, and I ended up just scrapping it when we went to a sound bar. But I've always wanted something like that just to be built directly into the experience. My Samsung Smart TV does some smart modeling, but it's more about trying to maximize spatial distances so that you have more of a surround effect on just regular 2.1 stereo speakers, and it's just not it's not doing what I really want it to do. But this is potentially something that we could see more from this dynamic processing that's coming to Android P. Again, you're not going to play with it, but this could be a huge benefit for a number of the services you use. I look at something like my VLC Media app. I love using VLC on Android for a pretty broad compatibility with a number of different video files and audio files. And so if I had that as like a check mark, I could go into the settings and say, hey, when I'm listening, pull speech out from the movie and make that highlighted, or really expand this into a wide like stereo or surround sound environment. Something like that would be really, really cool. From Link057, my Samsung TV has something like that in the settings. Yeah, again, it's not exactly what I was doing with hardware, which I think worked better. But again, anything that you can do to kind of rein in some of that change, some of that flutter, or some of that discrepancy between loud and quiet would be a pretty good benefit. From Sherrill, VLC, boo, I use MX Player. I used to use MX Player. It's fine. MX Player is great. It still does the gig just fine. I just really like supporting VLC because of some of their political stances on free and open software. And when they came out with an Android app and it was terrible, I started using it. And then as it got better, I was really happy to use it. But again, I'm really trying to live by this stuff, guys. I'm really trying to put my money where my mouth is. Little things like if I don't like the business practice from one manufacturer, I'm trying to find alternatives to that. Like last week when we talked about the GeForce Partner Program from NVIDIA, I was really shopping Vega cards hard. And I still might buy a Vega card just because of what NVIDIA did with the GPP, but I don't want to get into all that. Does MX Player not do picture-in-picture? MX Player was great, but VLC has PIP. I thought MX Player was getting PIP. Oh, or is that maybe just for Android Oreo? Sorry, there's a conversation happening in the live chat. I'm just gonna move on to these next two stories. Again, I want to cover these relatively efficiently. Two security-focused stories that aren't directly related to each other, but loosely tie into the coming arms race for how we protect our own data on the devices that we own and that we use. And the first one is from Android Police. The Secure Data Act would eliminate government-mandated backdoors on encrypted devices and communications. Now, Congress is set to vote on a bill that would prevent any government agency from requiring device manufacturers and software developers to implement backdoors in the encryption models for their products. Dubbed the Secure Data Act, this bipartisan initiative is a surprisingly good step toward keeping our data secure from unauthorized government access. So this is an ongoing debate. I know a lot of people get very hot-blooded about it. Just to share my own thoughts very briefly, when it comes to encryption, I believe consumers should have good faith access to the best possible tools available to protect their own data and their own behavior online. I think that should be paramount. That should be at the top. And then I believe law enforcement should make every effort on their own to break that security. And that's the arms race that we should see in a healthy back and forth between government and between businesses, between government and between commerce, and the citizenry being the ping pong ball in the middle, being whacked back and forth between government and corporations. I think that's our best compromise of protecting everybody. But then when something really bad happens and we're trying to get information out of these different products, that the government should have a vested interest in trying to knock that down. To me, it's a terrible analogy, but in my brain, it's kind of like I build a home and I put really great locks on those doors. I don't believe the lock manufacturer should have to send my key, a copy of my key, over to my state police. But if I do something terrible, I believe the state police should be able to roll up to my door and use a big old battering ram and knock that door down. But my lock manufacturer and the company that built my home should not be compelled to give access to my home to the state police before I've been accused of committing a crime. Terrible analogy. But that's kind of how I settled on my feelings on this in my brain. You know, just after we saw all those issues with iPhones not being able to be opened by law enforcement, potential terrorist cases, they were trying to use that as an excuse to compel Apple to break their own security on the iPhone, which at a time is completely not fair to ask of Apple when the iPhone is being used by a number of government agencies. You wouldn't want that to leak out, that there was a way to exploit the iPhone from Apple directly. I don't believe it's possible for a corporation to properly safeguard that kind of access against any bad actors out there, what with corporate espionage being at an all-time high. I'll take another quick drink of water here. So this is where the analogy falls apart from Renato Laporte, but the state police can get a warrant and you'll have to open your door, but digital is like if there's a back door, they can get inside whenever they want without you knowing. And that's why I think a lot of us get nervous about this kind of conversation, that we can properly protect your info as a company with this big, huge access point that only the government can get into. And then do we really believe that only the government will get into it? That's the thing I have. Let's say in an altruistic, perfect unicorn society that the government never does anything bad. Sorry, my little Ron Swanson in me popped out right there. The government never does anything bad. What's to say that won't eventually find its way into some other bad actor's hands? You know, look at all the malware that's coming out, this weaponized malware that's coming out that had its roots in CIA and NSA funded initiatives. You know, they couldn't keep that stuff on lock. What makes me think that they're going to keep the iPhone backdoor perfectly guarded? There's no such thing. So, so that's kind of frustrating. This is the next step, though, that I think might be a little bit controversial. And this comes by way of Mac rumors. Let me go back into screen share. iOS 11.4 disables Lightning connector after 7 days, limiting law enforcement access. So this is a USB restricted mode that's coming in an iOS update, 11.4. And it's kind of similar to some of the things that we already see in terms of login and software, where, like, for example, on my Android devices, even if I'm logging in regularly, it mandates, I think every 3 days, I have to put in the PIN that de-encrypts my phone. So even if I don't turn it off, at some point I have to put in my PIN code, and then it'll de-encrypt again. This would be something similar to that, where if the password, the proper password, not just your fingerprint, but the proper password or PIN isn't put in every 7 days, then you cannot utilize the USB port for anything but charging. So you can't connect it and see and get information off of that device. So ultimately, I think this is a good idea. Now, I think this is going to cause a lot of grief and a lot of strife with local law enforcement who might not always have the best possible resources for doing their own data recovery or getting into the investigation of a device. Like they might not have the same hardcore techies employed. They should. Instead of buying tanks and stuff, maybe they should put a little bit more money towards their IT department. But again, I digress. Cranky nerd is cranky. So ultimately, I think this is good. The other reason why I think this is good is that it's going to put pressure on local and federal law enforcement to properly utilize Apple as a resource. One of the things that really bothered me about the way that the last ginned up controversy about cracking open the iPhone went down was that law enforcement did not reach out to Apple. If I'm following the timeline correctly, and someone please correct me if I'm wrong, but law enforcement did not properly reach out to Apple until the phone was already locked up in a way that would have required Apple to break iOS and break their encryption, which I don't necessarily know is it. Well, no, I think now there are certain boxes that can do it for you. So it is possible. And Apple probably did have some idea of how they could have done it. But they didn't reach out to Apple within the time frame of that device being on, being powered, and maybe also having the ability to get that to sync up over iCloud. So law enforcement waited until it was a problem. And that made Apple look like they were being obstinate and not cooperating with law enforcement. That was my big problem with that event. They could have tried to get that iPhone immediately into Apple technician hands. Apple can do some things to utilize their server-side infrastructure. So say you set it up so that the phone is syncing with iCloud. You get the phone over to the alleged terrorist's home. You get it to connect to his Wi-Fi. Maybe it uploads information to iCloud or does some sort of backup. And then once that information is on Apple servers, then Apple can comply with law enforcement to get that information off of servers and into law enforcement's hands. But as soon as you've purposely pushed the lock to a point where it's not going to do that anymore, then law enforcement has this crowbar to say, well, now you need to de-encrypt iOS and you need to figure out how to do it for us. And that to me is completely unacceptable. So if Apple has put this 7-day limit in place, I feel that's going to be another kick up the pants towards law enforcement to say, get this to us in a more timely fashion. If it's as mission critical to your investigation as you're claiming it should be, then you should be able to come to us faster, more efficiently, and we can work together on getting this information out beyond us just breaking encryption for everybody. So that kind of stuff is, I feel, where I'm a little nervous about the pressure that they're putting on law enforcement, but if they're doing it in a good faith way where where Apple can then utilize their server infrastructure for iCloud, and then also the psychology of really trying to get, the perpetrators of these acts, if you capture them alive, to working with law enforcement to try and reduce their sentences and stuff. Like, I think all of the psychology around this needs to be digital moves fast. The appropriate course of action is not to wait until it becomes a problem. It's to be proactive in solving that problem. And I think hopefully this pressure will further illustrate to law enforcement why this tech stuff needs to be taken more seriously than I feel it currently is. So we've got, I saw a message pop up from Kyle Ruggles, from Renato Laporte. Indeed, every 3 days I have to put in my password. Not a PIN fan. From my phone review days, I just had so many different devices going on with like limited access to my important information that I kind of got used to a PIN, and that's a bad habit I need to get back into, putting in a much more difficult to crack password for my encryption. Kyle Ruggles, but exclamation point, exclamation point, exclamation point. The question is, if they're looking for evidence to find someone and they found a lost phone after 10 days and that person owns that phone that they're trying to find, what then? And again, I don't have a good answer for that, Kyle. I don't feel our society has gotten to a point where we can answer those kinds of procedural questions, because I don't feel our society is taking electronic gadgetry as seriously as they should. We only have these discussions when tempers are at a maximum, where emotions are running super high. Like after the San Bernardino shooting, that's when we were rushing to try and create some kind of legislation or some kind of best practices. And that's the wrong time to do that. I really feel in between tragedies is when we should be rationally sitting down to try and hammer out the details and work between federal, state agencies and major corporations. We just need to have those conversations, and we need to have this meeting of the minds at a time when we're not under the pressure of terrorist says a bomb's going to go off if we can't unlock his phone in 12 hours. That's a Jack Bauer situation. You know, we don't want to keep running into Jack Bauer situations to then set public policy. So I don't have a good answer for that. And I still fall back on the amount of harm in that one instance. So the one person who gets away, we get his phone, but it's past the 10 days and we can't get any information off of that phone, versus the everyday life of millions and billions of people on this planet that could be harmed by a backdoor being exploited by a bad actor. How do we balance that? The immediacy of one emotional event right up front versus the compromised security of everybody else on the planet. And it sucks. And I know that if something were to happen to me personally, I would probably want to see, you know, every tool being utilized to break into this device to help, you know, solve the problem. But rationally, outside of being immediately affected by that, I want to err on the needs of the many outweighing the needs of the few or the one. And so I keep coming back to my initial terrible analogy. I wouldn't want my home manufacturer and my lock manufacturer to just give access to state law enforcement until a crime has been committed, or until I've been accused of committing a crime. And then they can open up my doors, either with me there and I unlock the door and I let them in. But if they're serving a warrant, they knock down the door and they go about their business. Again, I didn't proactively give them access to my home. It's only reactively that law enforcement is able to access that content. But it's ugly. But it's super ugly, and I don't feel we have a good answer for what to do with the intellectual property on our mobile devices. And I really don't have a good feeling of our elected officials and the people who write our laws having a good handle on this stuff either. From Jared Parsons, law enforcement wants it all. I don't disagree with that sentiment. From the federal cops to the state and local cops, I worry that some of their current implementation of policy doesn't necessarily reflect the changing landscape of modern technology. And I worry that not a lot of people within those ranks fully understand the ramifications of some of the things that they're asking for, actually making their jobs more difficult and making their jobs harder to do by doing things like building in backdoors. If identity theft and information theft is a priority, then those types of situations are much darker and apt to be made significantly worse than they currently are than those one-off situations where someone's committed a crime and they might have information on their phone which will lead to capturing other bad guys. Those are such solitary and singular experiences versus the wide open path of destruction that could come about from just unlocked back doors. From Kyle Ruggles, y'all need to elect a geek or a scientist or some kind of intellectual for president. Oh, man, don't you know it. Kyle Ruggles is from Canada, so he likes to literally look down at us from up on high in the north. Real quick, I just want to cover this because I know this makes a lot of people kind of cranky, some of the more conservative people that have watched my channel or listened to my podcast. Ambitious plan would bring statewide public broadband to Michigan. MiFi, Michigan Fi. treat the internet like a utility instead of a commodity. Gubernatorial candidate in Michigan wants the entire state to have free, publicly owned internet. Abdul El Sayed, running as a Democrat in this fall's election, calls it MiFi. Public networks are an idea that has been growing in both political parties. In January, there were rumors that President Trump was going to push for a nationalized 5G network outside of private control. That idea has yet to formally materialize on the national scale. This is a story by way of Popular Mechanics. I'll throw that in the links as well. This is my thing, man. I really do. I am a capitalist at heart, and I want to see more companies making money. But when companies work together to prevent competition, then there needs to be an alternative. And if state laws are currently preventing new competition from entering into that space, then local townships, cities, communities, even full states need to get on board some other kind of initiative. And every single time we've seen publicly funded communication actually make it off the ground after surviving the armies of lawyers and the lawsuits that come from ISPs and carriers, we see some pretty incredible stuff. I'm going to point to Chattanooga, Tennessee. That's an incredibly successful infrastructure. It's generating revenue for the state. Everyone gets a significantly higher tier of service for less money. And right now, there doesn't seem to be any corporate competition that can do the same. So ultimately, if I'm a capitalist and I'm not getting the best possible quality, then I'm going to want more competition. And if the only competition available to me is state funded, then that's what I'm going to go for. Right now, we're stuck in a terrible holding pattern in California because we still can't figure out what to do about, say, fiber to the home. And everyone's trying to pretend like we can do this without laying fiber with 5G. And that's nonsense. At some point, we're still going to need data centers and cables and backhaul that can properly support an increasing demand on broadband infrastructure. The only thing that really does solve that problem is fiber, is lighting up dark fiber and rolling it out directly to nodes in your home. 5G will help for some more rural access and for people who don't have or aren't economically viable for some of these other cable and broadband initiatives. But again, if you're in an area that's not economically viable for a Comcast or an AT&T or a Verizon to improve your service, then make your own service. That to me seems to be the only solution. When your hands are tied, the state government is working against competition. Carriers and ISPs have helped alter legislation to prevent competition, and new companies aren't going to walk into your space to compete. Make your own competition. And so I'm all for Michigan. If you can make a public broadband initiative work, that's going to improve competition in your state. Then a Comcast, or I don't know who the main ISP is for Michigan, or if there are any competing ISPs in Michigan. But if you have sort of a state level of broadband that actually services everybody, then to pay more means that they're going to have to offer a better service than what people can get for free. I'm all for it. Do it. Break it. Because I'm getting really tired of this fake debate that we're having about state initiatives for community-funded broadband. Every single time it's gone up, it's made the situation better for the residents in that area. In the United States, I don't know of any operating state-funded initiatives after going through lawsuits against carriers and ISPs and after dealing with state laws that is operating right now that doesn't offer a substantial improvement of service at a lower cost than what surrounding areas have to pay for with their cable provider. Again, I'm paying out the nose for 300 down, 20 megabit up. It's ridiculous. I think I'm paying 3 times the price of I'm paying a little bit more than twice the price of gigabit in Tennessee. Chattanooga, gigabit up and down is half the cost of what I'm currently paying for 300 down, 20 up in Los Angeles, California. California, the 5th largest economy in the world, home to Silicon Valley, and the best I have access to is a 20 megabit upload, which is horse shit. Terrible. burn it all down. If I can't get real competition, then I'm going to pay for a state-funded community initiative instead, and I'm going to put my money where my mouth is. Anytime someone wants to roll into my neck of the woods in the valley and offer competition, I will leave Spectrum in a heartbeat. I will break my phone picking it up so fast to call them to cancel my service to go with another provider. Done. It's a done deal. I have my money. I'm ready to vote with my wallet, and no one is here to take my money. That's competition. That's real competition, not this fake bullshit competition that we have right now. I saw some people saying I was a communist, so let's see where we're at. Capitalist pig. Kyle Ruggles, ain't it great? Kyle Ruggles, socialist or capitalist? No, I am a capitalist, but that's, again, if we don't have a free and fair market, then we need to find ways to regulate that and protect it. From Q3 Becker, nothing's faster than the speed of light, man. Fiber, get that fiber done. Do it. So from Renato Laporte, I see more pro than cons in a publicly controlled network. Again, across the board, this is what bothers me is we're in this sort of this cyclical discussion of authoritarian government rights versus corporate infrastructure rights. And I know a lot of people are concerned. You're like, oh, if the government has too much control over something, or if the government has too much access to something. But we've flipped that conversation so far to the deregulated corporate side that now corporations have that boot stomping on our neck. And we need to move that back and forth. There are going to be times where the government overreaches, is way too much of an authoritarian force in our lives, and we'll need to fight back against that power. But right now, since the Reagan administration here in the United States, we've been so upset about the government boogeyman that we've enabled corporations to do exactly the same thing in advising public policy, in having control over infrastructure, over preventing competition. That's already happened. So now we need that pendulum swing to come back to some kind of regulation over these enormous mega corporations that have insidiously deep control and access to every waking moment of our public and private lives. So that's what we need to do. I'm not advocating, divestiture. I'm not saying we should break up every company like we did when AT&T got too big for its britches, but we're getting really close. IMO. So from Q3 Becker, this is actually one of the big disappointments. Q3 Becker, you'd wonder why Google didn't lay fiber in California. And it's because California has a lot of bureaucratic state and city barriers to new competition. And they've got this really, really clean gentleman's agreement where different areas and different districts are basically serviced by one major ISP. And so that's it. Like, I can pay for 300 down, 20 up, which is pretty good down. It's terrible upload speeds. Or I can pay the same amount of money for, I think, 5 megabit DSL. That's my competition. And they've completely sort of rigged the local markets to make sure that no one really ever has the chance to get proper competition in the greater LA metro area. It changes a little bit when you go north, especially San Francisco and Sacramento. You get a little closer to lawmakers, and wouldn't you know it, well, things are a little bit different than when you're down in LA, but it's all completely rigged and manipulated, and this is why we need to break up this sort of oligopoly. That's not how you say that word. Way that we do business with this kind of infrastructure. I would love to see a public option because we've prevented other companies from coming in to properly compete head to head against the entrenched ISPs that are already players and already winners in their area. From Q3 Becker again, we got fiber to home and they upgraded our speed for free last year from 50/50 to 350. I guarantee you're spending way less for 350 than I am for 320. Okay, folks, in lieu of the general Q&A stuff that I do, because we're also getting into the 2-hour mark here, and I always complain about talking for too long because, 2-hour podcasts and whatnot. But we got to wrap this week up with President Trump and ZTE. This is such a messy story that we find ourselves at now, getting to the end of this chain over Chinese corporations doing business in the United States. The Chinese companies that are most under scrutiny are those that seem to provide network and telecommunications infrastructure, not just selling phones. And companies, Chinese companies that have had real problems with data breaches don't ever seem to get mentioned in these law enforcement advisories. But this is taking it back to the original law enforcement advisory where the United States Department of Justice and members under them, the FBI, NSA, CIA, put out a public statement warning consumers against using products from Huawei and ZTE, citing concerns over malicious traffic, their ties to the Chinese government, and that these could be potential backdoors into Chinese intelligence gathering. Then the next step was ZTE getting hit with an import ban for 7 years. So ZTE was found guilty of breaking trade sanctions set up by the United States, also involving Iran. And I think they were fined $1.2 billion. And I believe, and someone will correct me on this if I'm wrong, I believe certain members of the ZTE executives, were supposed to serve jail time. ZTE did not fully comply with those penalties, and that's why they were served this 7-year ban. Shortly after, ZTE was hit with this import ban where they cannot use any United States or American equipment or software in their products. Huawei is now being investigated for similar trade sanction for breaking similar trade sanctions. So we're seeing, again, a focus from our Department of Justice on ZTE and Huawei for these types of business practices. Now, ZTE did need to face some kind of penalty because they did not fully live up to their responsibilities. So when they were found guilty, they were levied this fine. They didn't fully comply with those penalties. They need to face new penalties. What I'm concerned about, though, is that the penalties that they faced basically completely gutted the company. So if ZTE cannot utilize any American equipment or any American software for 7 years, that company is essentially dead in the world of telecommunications. And this isn't just for consumer-facing products like cell phones. ZTE smartphones make up a shockingly tiny fragment of their overall operating expenses and operating revenue. This is really that they're, I think, one of the large. I want to say they're the fourth largest. I can't remember. But they're one of the largest players in terms of overall telecommunications infrastructure, falling behind Huawei, Huawei falling behind Qualcomm. And then we get like Nokia and Siemens and Ericsson and a number of other players that also have vested interests in the infrastructure surrounding telecommunications hardware and protocols. So, 2 Chinese companies, one of them on the chopping block, already facing a significant amount of fallout from this imports ban. Another major player in China, which is now under investigation for very similar business practices, could find themselves in a similar situation where Huawei devices, components, and infrastructure products can no longer use American equipment. And now we run into President Trump engaging in some kind of deal with China to help minimize the impact of that import ban. So this is a Financial Review. This is where I've got the story from. U.S. President Donald Trump on Monday sought to defend his unusual intervention in a sanctions violation case against China's ZTE after bipartisan criticism of the move in Washington. Quote, ZTE, the large Chinese phone company, buys a big percentage of individual parts from U.S. companies, the president tweeted. This is also reflective of the larger trade deal we are negotiating with China and my personal relationship with President Xi Jinping. So, again, this is a really complex issue that I really wish our president wasn't tweeting about. It's so many moving parts and so many connected ideas, threads, crimes, penalties, business practices, contracts, that we won't be able to sum this up in a couple of tweets, and it makes it look like there's something else happening here behind the scenes. I don't get the sense that Trump, as any kind of business deal maker, really understands the implications of what's happening here. But what our administration is currently fighting for is maybe if America is lenient to ZTE over these penalties, that we can then reassess import duties on agricultural products. So we would be backing off of agricultural tariff, that China would be backing off of the tariffs that are placed on American products going into China, agricultural products going into China, and we would lighten up on ZTE's import ban, which no one seems to want to do in our current administration and in the Department of Justice, saying that we'll back off of, you know, the damage that was done from ZTE engaging in these, violating these trade sanctions. So that's already ugly enough. Again, I kind of feel like Trump deserves some kind of scrutiny over all of his campaign promises about American jobs and looking out for America, and the terrible alignment with American first propaganda while he's out there trying to save a humongous major Chinese player, a direct competitor to a number of American industries. I'm also worried about the hardline stance from our Department of Justice on ZTE, because I'm not entirely sure that we should be going to punitive actions that completely decimate corporations when it comes to appropriately penalizing certain types of behavior. I feel like, you need to hurt them, but you don't fix anything, or you don't teach anything, or you don't prevent other companies from engaging in similar business practices if your only option is, well, now you're nuked. Now you just don't exist anymore, and your entire corporation was carved up for parts and pieces, and all those pieces went to other players, so they'll be doing business in similar ways too, because we can just keep playing the shell game with parts of corporations being bought and sold on the cheap. I don't really feel like that fixes the problem if we're saying that the problem was spying, telecommunications, interception, or violating trade sanctions. And this is all coming at the same time. And this is what's frustrating. I'm going to put my tinfoil hat on now, and please follow me in the comments here, because I'd love to hear your thoughts on this. So Trump is working out an agricultural tariffs deal to minimize the import ban facing ZTE. At the same time, and no one's linking this in the traditional media, that the Chinese government is going to contribute $500 million to Trump-linked projects in Indonesia. A subsidiary of Chinese state-owned construction firm Metallurgical Corporation of China signed a deal last week, and this story was published yesterday. So in the midst of all of this ZTE conversation, signed a deal last week with the Indonesian firm MNC Land to build an integrated lifestyle resort as part of Beijing's global influence expanding Belt and Road Infrastructure Initiative. The project will include a number of Trump-branded hotels, a golf course, and a residence, while the $500 million loan will not be directly allocated to any of the Trump branding features. Beijing's contribution of half the project's total operating budget ensures the success of the broader theme park venture. This is where I get really mad. Trump has not fully divested himself from operations of the Trump organization. We're seeing some really odd plays. I mean, again, he was saber rattling like crazy about how he was going to take it to China, and they were really going to go after ZTE and Huawei over all of this 5G conversation, when I don't believe any of them in this current administration really knows what 5G wireless connectivity really is. They've used that as leverage to help move through deals like T-Mobile and Sprint merging. They've stood in the way of other parts of deals being sold through. AT&T, for example, having some issues there. Time Warner having problems, CNN being a sticking point in certain negotiations. And then we get to the ZTE deal. I don't get agricultural tariffs from China being minimized to help ZTE, with the backdrop being $500 million from China going directly into projects that would greatly benefit the Trump organization. And that to me looks like we've got an administration that can be bought and paid for. We've got a number of political issues. Tearing up the Iran deal, I think, is going to be a huge boon for Russia, especially in terms of trying to keep global prices on petroleum as high as possible. That instability serves Russian interests. And, if you were following the story before, I think it was last week or the week before when I was talking about Ford getting rid of cars and going to SUVs and crossover vehicles. If you're buying a gas-guzzling vehicle, now's the wrong time to do it, with Russian interference, manipulating oil prices, and the Iran deal getting blown up right in front of our faces. Our influence over the world stage is at an all-time low, and I don't know that we could be sending clearer messages to countries that don't always have our best interests at heart, that if you want to go straight to the top and just throw a whole bunch of money at them, that they can fix your problems, regardless of whether or not that's for the good of the American people. It's short-term Reaganomics at its worst. We can gut the future for short-term gain. We can enrich the lives of people who are already insanely wealthy at the expense of everybody else below them. And we can do that because we have all the power to, and no one can stop us. This is a very disappointing turn in our current political discourse, in our current state of politics and diplomacy, with a State Department that's woefully incapable of keeping up with all of the rapidly moving parts in world politics, and an administration that just stomps through it anyway and doesn't seem to have any care or attention to any of that. So I'm very disappointed in how this is all playing out. My own personal disappointment is I was a big fan of the Axon 7 and I wanted to see an Axon 9, but I'm not sure that this is how all of these parts and pieces should be played to get us back into some working state. I have concerns over the DOJ destroying a company over some of these penalties. I have concerns over our administration doing business directly with China for their own personal gain. This is not the same as saying all politicians are paid shills. This is a completely new state of affairs where instead of money being contributed to a campaign or being contributed to an opponent's campaign, this is money going directly to enrich the corporation of a politician at the highest level. And that's not okay. I already have a problem with Citizens United. We shouldn't have unlimited spending for influencing politicians. This is another step. This is another bridge too far. We've already crossed so many bridges too far, and this is another one that is incredibly unseemly and is a really bad look. And when I'm reading through these stories, they're not putting these two side by side. They're not putting Trump is having business meetings. The Trump organization is having business meetings with Chinese officials for insane amounts of funding and loans, alongside Trump is being influenced by Chinese politics to weaken a trade sanction, an import ban on ZTE. Those to me seem linked, that there should be some crossover, that the backdrop of the ZTE deal is coming. The backdrop of that ZTE deal is a $500 million loan from a Chinese industry. And that makes me a little bit sick. Let me go through. I don't know how you guys are feeling about this. Again, there are so many really ugly parts and pieces to this, with two companies that I liked for their consumer-facing electronics, and I'm not really sure how this should play out. What do we hope to expect from some of these political maneuvers and business machinations, where do we even want to be at the end of all of this? Because right now, we don't have a lot of say in how this stuff is playing out. Kyle Ruggles, pay for play. It's all right there. I really have to stop watching American news. How are you all not losing your effing minds? Again, Kyle's Canadian, so he's a little buffered from all of this. This is how Trump thinks. He links one thing to another, expects you to see it and understand it, but it's not based on reality. Stop trying to understand this and Russia, OMG. From David Baptista Silva, all governments can be bought as long as you have campaigns to pay for political parties and politicians with independent businesses. So yes, because of things like Citizens United, I do believe that corporations can wield an excessive amount of influence over individual politicians. But that's also why the political process does seem to matter. If we look at the Obama administration, for all of my issues with Obama on whistleblowers and drone strikes, not to mention that Trump has already matched or beaten the number of casualties from drone strikes from the entire Obama administration, that still kept going. We haven't fixed that issue either. For all my issues with the Obama administration over those things, I can't think of a single payola scam. I can't think of a single issue that had a direct pay to influence this administration. Not in the same way that we're seeing here, where money is just being dumped into Trump's brand. I can't think of anything that the Obama administration fell for to that same degree where we can point to that and say, see, both sides are just as corrupt. So this is also what's so vitally important about voting. I keep using the FCC as an example here. If you think your vote doesn't matter, we actually influenced politics from the Obama administration to the Trump administration. When Obama was in office, we had an FCC. Tom Wheeler was at the head of the FCC, and liberals had voted in a liberal administration. That administration staffed the FCC with people that were at least amenable to the idea of the original open internet order, and we eventually arrived at Title II regulation of the internet. Then conservatives voted in a conservative administration, and now that's been gutted, and we're at the final dying days of net neutrality. There's one last vote, which might prolong it, but it's pretty certain at this point that all of the work, almost 20 years of legal movements, of lawsuits, of companies acting in good faith, companies acting in bad faith, will now be undone in 2 years from Trump being elected. What can we lay that on? We can lay that on people voting in elected officials having an impact on daily lives, on our daily lives, on public policy. And if we vote in a more liberal-leaning administration, it's going to be another years-long fight to try and reenact or reset some of the damage done to the FCC debate. So we actually do see the changes in policy from when we vote. Both parties are not the same in terms of what they're trying to accomplish, who they're trying to please, and where they get their funds from. It's not exactly the same. This is one of the big specious, arguments that's levied as to why I won't vote for this, or I'm going to not vote at all, or I'm not going to participate in the political process. When those things change, we do see a change. Now, if we were trying to go with something more libertarian leaning and we just left it up to corporations, can you influence the behavior of a corporation just through an act as simple as voting? You cannot. So we can influence how the government goes about trying to regulate things and how the government goes about trying to influence world politics. We can't just show up at a shareholders meeting and say, hey, Comcast, I don't like how you're doing business. So as just a general citizen of the United States, I'm going to vote you out. Even if you're a shareholder of Comcast, unless you are some kind of majority stake shareholder, you do not have any significant influence over how that corporation does business, and you'll be fighting major players, major shareholders who just want to see more money being generated through their investment in Comcast. This is the major sticking point in this conversation. We can affect policy, we can influence policy, and we need to do so if we're going to walk back disastrous measures like Citizens United. David Batista Silva, this is why monarchies are better at preventing corruption. A monarch doesn't need to campaign or to please businesses to stay in power. Again, democracy is the absolute worst system of government on the planet, except for all of the others, IMO. I'm badly ripping off that quote from a number of other people who have said it wittier and smarter than I have. It's a monarchy is going to have its own issues too, because once the monarchy changes hands into someone who doesn't necessarily have the people's best interests at heart, then you can't influence them at all. So it's kind of a, there are pros and cons, I'm sure, but I'll still take the more evolutionary approach to democracy over just sort of an authoritarian or religious right ruled monarchy instead. From Fat Produce, this administration is up to the highest bidder. Who are we kidding? They aren't even hiding it. And again, there's no shame here. This is open, outright plays that should be, any one of these problems would be an administration or career-ending issue for any other president. But for some reason, we just expect it of Trump, and so we're okay with him doing this. From Philip Vaughn, my love of technology was my escape from today's issues. It saddens me how corruption has spread throughout all areas of our daily lives. And again, yeah, I'm with you there, man. This is the big disappointment is I don't want to be making my tech chat show and podcast as heavily politically motivated, but for all the things that I love about technology, they're actively and aggressively influencing every aspect of our daily lives. And this is why we need to be vigilant as the people who understand these issues with more complexity and with more nuance to try and bring more people into the conversation. So at that point, we're at 2 hours and it's time we wrap this up. I really want to thank everybody who was in the live chat. You guys are awesome. There was a great conversation going on. Joining me both on YouTube, the YouTube live stream and the Periscope. I also throw this up on the Twitch, although I don't put up a lot on my Twitch, so I don't expect you all to be following us there too. Oh, wait, hold on. I've got to reply to this comment from David Batista Silva. Wait. England, Spain, Netherlands, Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Belgium, all of these are monarchies, Juan, and democracies. Yes, I think you get the point there. When the monarchy has absolute control and authority over the daily operations of a country, that's far different than when you also have some kind of parliamentary system. And a lot of those countries, don't they also have to appeal to the European Union as well? So there are multiple layers of bureaucracy involved in that conversation beyond just one authoritarian ruler at the top who wears a crown. What says God says I can do anything I want. Big difference. And so I'm glad you put out the tongue sticking out emoticon. So yeah, this is what we're trying to arrive at here around the world, is more oversight and attention being paid to these issues. So yes, thank you so much for watching. This is the Monday Morning Tech Chat show on a Tuesday. We do these every week. If you want to be involved in this and then some future interviews that I've got coming up, definitely check out the SGGQA podcast. If you want this in audio form and you don't want to have to stream it through YouTube, you can download all of these episodes shortly after they've been broadcast. I do a little edit. And then if you want the ad-free version of this podcast, that will be a perk that I will unlock soon, hopefully, on my Patreon page, which is also where I'm going to be throwing a lot of my new deep dive feature reviews. So I spent the weekend with the LG G7. This is the LG G7 Think U. And it was a champ in San Diego. I've got a ton of really great photos and videos that I'm going to be sharing, but the full camera review and the full audio review for this phone will be going to my Patreon page. They will not be public anymore. Full review of the phone, that'll be public. I'm wrapping up the Honor View 10, hopefully this afternoon, so you'll be able to see that too. And then you can always catch me on Newegg Now every Thursday. Last week we did cord cutting. It was a great episode, just talking about different ways that we can stream content and literally get rid of different cables around our workspace, from wireless keyboards and mice to HDMI solutions. It was a lot of fun to put that show together. Next week we're going to be doing some more work in VR, and I should have a teaser for Beat Saber. I finally got to play Beat Saber, and that game is so flipping fun. It's unreal. So we'll be talking about that coming up too. Folks, again, this has been an amazing chat. I really want to thank you all for joining this conversation and then taking these conversations and rejoining them with your family and friends, because I feel we need to be more proactive tech citizens, protecting those amongst our ranks who aren't as savvy as we are. So this is the end of the Monday Morning Tech Chat show. We'll be back next week, regular time on Monday mornings, roughly 9 a.m. Pacific. You know where you can find me around the web. In the meantime, if you want to join this conversation, you can hit me up on Twitter and Instagram as @SomeGadgetGuy, and I will catch you all on the next Monday Morning Tech Chat show. Thanks for watching.